Hey guys, Justin here. So today I'm going to the Cinemark here at the Willowbrook Mall in Wayne, New Jersey to go see Final Destination Bloodlines. This is the sixth installment in the Final Destination franchise following Final Destination 5, which released back in 2011. So this movie is directed by Zach Lipovsky and Adam Stein and stars Caitlin Sanajuana, Tio Briones, Richard Hartman, Owen Patrick Joyner, Raya Kilstead, Anna Lohr, Rick Batzinger, and Tony Todd. So ever since I was young, I've really enjoyed the Final Destination franchise. I might have been a little bit too young to watch it, but that's besides the point. Each movie brought something different to the story, and I think it's really fascinating that now, after 14 years following the previous one, now there's new stuff that they're going to cover that hasn't been touched on before. I've always enjoyed movies that touch on more supernatural subjects because it kind of happens outside the realm of reality, but also possible that it could happen in a kind of strange cosmic sort of way.
In a cosmic sort of way, yes.
And if you also want to understand what type of impact that Final Destination has had on our collective consciousness, anytime I'm on a highway and I see one of those logging trucks in front of me, I always go back to the second movie because that's how it all started. I still got like over an hour until the movie starts, so I'm just gonna walk around the mall until then. Where's my drink? My Diet Dr. Kelp? I'm ready!
How's your technique?
There's nobody else in my theater right now, so I think this is the perfect time to do this. So they got the regular seats, and then in the middle of the theater, they have this thing called D-Box. So you have individual settings that you can use here, and depending on what's going on inside the movie, your seat can vibrate. I'm sure for a movie like this, you're just gonna feel everything flying at you. Well, the movie's over now. I was the first, and now the last one in the theater. This one is definitely different from the previous installments, but I'm gonna get into that shortly. I'm gonna go get some dinner, and then do my review at home. That is, if I do make it home. Whoa! Whoa! I've got to eat carefully. All right, let's get into it. I tried to do something a little different this time of how I worded everything, so let's see if this works out. In the late 1960s, a young couple, Iris and Paul, visit a skytop restaurant, and Iris is struck by this haunting premonition as they go up the building. Moments later, a chain of freak events cause the entire structure to collapse, killing them both. And decades later, a college student named Stephanie is plagued by vivid dreams of this tragedy, and these visions are intense enough that they begin to unravel any sense of sanity she had. She realizes that the woman in these premonitions shares the same name with her estranged grandma. She goes home in order to search for answers. Her father, Marty, insists that Iris is a mentally unstable person, and part of the reason that Steph's mother has left. But her curiosity only deepens when she goes to see her cousins. She then asks her uncle Howard about anything related to Iris, and Howard tells her that Iris had withdrawn from the world after a traumatic event and claims to have foreseen deaths from that restaurant. In order to understand these visions just a little bit more, Steph actually finds a way to go visit her grandma. She sets off to visit Iris at this remote cabin. There, Iris reveals that Steph's dreams were a real premonition, and Iris used this premonition to save all the people in that restaurant. But fate has balance, and those who were spared that night were eventually killed off in bizarre, delayed accidents. Over 50 years later, death is correcting its course. and Steph's family, unfortunately, is targeted. Iris dies sacrificing herself for Steph, which draws Stephanie's absent mother, Darlene, back into the family, and more bizarre accidents start happening, including horrific lawnmower mishap at a family barbecue, and because of that, Steph becomes convinced that there's a deadly force that is working its way through their bloodline, hence Final Destination Bloodlines. Desperate to find more answers about this, she uncovers the name of a survivor named JB from records that her grandma had. This JB happens to be William Bloodworth from the previous Final Destination movies. He confirms to them this truth that death has a design, and those who try to escape it are just borrowing time. And their only ways to cheat it is to kill someone, which they refuse to do, or die and be revived. But those attempts to game the system go horribly wrong. One of Stephanie's cousins, Eric, dies in a brutal MRI accident after a botched attempt to cheat death. And her other cousin, Bobby, follows Eric in a gruesome vending machine incident. Steph, her brother Charlie, and Darlene flee to Iris's cabin, only to end up in a fiery explosion, taking Darlene, and Charlie having to rescue Stephanie from a sinking RV. But just when it seems Stephanie and Charlie have escaped their fate, one last disaster strikes before Charlie's prom. A derailed train comes and sends logs crashing into their neighborhood, and Steph and Charlie are unfortunately crushed in the chaos. And death, once again, proves unstoppable. I tried a few different methods in order to kind of put my own twist on how to say all of the plot details, and I think it kind of worked out and got everything down in a relatively short amount of time, which is something that I try to do with these videos. I try to get through as many details as fast as I can. Sometimes it's hard because some of the stories are so dense. Credit scenes, there's no post-credit scene in this movie, but there is a montage of other deaths from descendants of the guests of the rooftop restaurant that play during the credits before the rest of the credits. One thing that I did find really surprising, something interesting I'd like to point out, this was Tony Todd's final performance, and his character, having experienced so much trauma over the years, it was actually very comforting for his character to enjoy the time that he has left, instead of them killing him off. That just would have seemed weird. So, some critiques I have about this, both positive and negative. I did feel the CGI was a little bit distracting for this movie, and kind of took me out of it at times, but overall, I was pretty invested. And this had the most comedic scenes out of any of the Final Destination movies, which I genuinely appreciate from that, because it's so hard to laugh when all this crazy stuff is going on. The story felt pretty self-contained, but it acknowledges the legacy of the series in partially subtle ways, like the log truck in one scene of this movie, and an airplane in the grandma's notes. Eric's character was a little bit strange because his constant morbid curiosity just felt a little bit forced, and especially with his willingness to sacrifice his brother, which happened during that scene where he got crushed by the MRI machine. This movie definitely felt more grounded, despite having supernatural elements in it. I felt more engaged with these characters, and honestly, I had no idea what was going to happen to them, even though I understand the formula for most Final Destination movies. This one actually kept me on my toes quite a bit, and I enjoy that. I enjoy not knowing when something's going to happen, even if I know how it should happen, if that makes sense. So I would say my final rating for this movie is a 4 out of 5. There are some things I think it could improve on, but for what it is, being a 6th installment in a franchise, I think it worked out pretty well. And having gone 14 years without a Final Destination movie, this was actually quite refreshing. I gotta say, 2025 has been pretty impressive with its movie lineup, even though the year's not even halfway over. I think this reminds me very much of 2019, when there was a string of very carefully crafted movies that came out. The legacy that those have left behind are now being reflected on these years later. With the stuff that I've seen so far, I feel like looking back, maybe like 10, 15, 20 years from now, I feel like many people are going to be like, yeah, that was actually pretty good. But only time can tell. But with that being said, I'd like to thank you for watching this recap and review. And if you want to stay updated with anything that I do, you can check my socials. And if you want to keep up with more stuff like this, you can subscribe to JShay Media. But other than that, thanks for watching.